reading an entire statement and we concur. I think Ms. Fox really cogently expressed all of the concerns that we hear from the opposition to Ordinance 984.
Yes.
Mr. Brandalisi.
My chairman concur.
The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. I did send you a letter, which I'd like to read just some portions of it. Many Narberth citizens feel that Bill Martin, as the Borough Zoning Officer, the Solicitor, and Borough Council members, as our elected officials, have let the citizens of Narberth down with respect to upholding and enforcing the Narberth Code regarding the garage that is being built by the Holdmans at 316 North Essex Avenue. The garage that is being built has a footprint of 1,211 square feet and is approximately 2,000 square feet in total when you include the second floor, and is as large as many of the homes in Narberth. This garage is being expanded in 2 side yard setbacks and is within 3 feet of the property lines, and per the building plans has plumbing, HVAC, and a terrace. I have clearly shown you how the garage is in violation of 2 sections of the Narberth Code. It is being built into 2 side yard setbacks, which is not allowed per section 124-55.1C of the zoning section of the Narberth Code. The garage can only be built expanded into 1 side yard setback. The building permit should have been issued since a variance was not obtained through the zoning hearing board to allow building into 2 side yard setbacks. Also, a notification to the appropriate neighbors should have been done as well. The garage, which has a footprint of 1,211 square feet, exceeds the building area size restriction of 660 square feet as defined for a private garage in section 50-46 of the building construction section of the Narberth Code. This area restriction is still in effect for section 5A of ordinance 902, which is consistent with section 7210-.303 existing municipal building code ordinances from the Uniform Construction Code, UCC, and is very clearly stated in section 50-3 of the Narberth Code that the restriction on area found in chapter 50 controls. Thus, the 660 square feet restriction found in section 50-46 controls. Therefore, the footprint of the new garage with an area of 1,211 square feet exceeds the 660 area allowed and is in violation of the Narberth Code. I'd also pointed out some other, I did have a discussion with our solicitor, John Walco, on 12-1, and the arguments put forth by Mr. Walco and the Borough Office, I believe, are not valid arguments. And the argument that Mr. Walco provided with respect to the new garage being built into 2 side yard setbacks, which is not permitted by the code, is that Bill Martin has allowed some garages to be built expanded into both a side yard and rear yard. This is also against the code, since you can only build into 1 side yard or rear yard, not both. Nonetheless, this argument is irrelevant with respect to building into 2 side yards. The argument that John Walco puts forth that the 660 square foot restriction does not apply is that since the garage is over 1,000 square feet and that we are now following the Universal Construction Code, both the UCC itself and our ordinance 902, which adopts UCC, which is implemented in Chapter 50 of the Narberth Code, clearly indicates that the 660 square foot area restriction controls, and you could never get larger than 660 square feet. Bill Martin, the zoning officer, and I believe the solicitor, are allowing the garage to continue to be built anyway, even though it's clearly in violation of Narberth Code. I also had some instances here that the process followed by our office regarding the site plan for the new garage was irregular. Another point I'd like to point out here is an additional item that I would like to bring to the Borough Council's attention is that the garage is being built with the window openings less than 3 feet of 2 property lines, which is against the 2012 International Residential.
1 minute, right?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the warning. So I was just curious why Yerkes Associates was not following the code there as well. I was told that I can go to the zoning hearing board to appeal the zoning officer's decisions, which would cost me money to do so. I want to ask a question, I guess. Does the borough still stand behind that the garage meets code, both zoning and building code? And if I do go to the zoning hearing board and you were asked to follow the section 124-93 remedy violation penalties, which would indicate that for that, since it's a violation of the zoning chapter, if we went there and found out that that was indeed the case, that 2 side yards was greater than 1, it would require having the entire structure taken down. Would you, as borough office, mayor, and borough council, uphold your individual responsibilities as detailed in that section? I plead the Borough Council to take action now to stop construction of the garage so that this all can be worked out. Will these meeting minutes be posted as part, or this letter be posted as part of the meeting minutes and made available to the public if there was a search out there? Is that how this
Yes,
is?
I will.
Okay. If you could possibly provide responses in terms of this, so I would understand if I was to go to the zoning hearing board. Thank you.
I'm going to allow Mr. Walco
Yeah.
to make a response. I'm going to ask the individual counselors to refrain, although you're free to do whatever you like, because I know that Mr. Lisa has received a number of responses in this general area.
To answer your last question there is whether this council would stand behind if the zoning hearing board issued an order to that property was in violation. They wouldn't have any say in it one way or another. The zoning hearing board is a separate entity, and it really isn't a connection. There shouldn't be any communication between this council and the zoning hearing board. They have level of independence. They issue an order. They have their own solicitor. And if you were to file an appeal and they issued an order saying that it was in violation, then the builder would be in violation of the zoning according to their interpretation. And then they would have to follow the zoning hearing board's order. This council couldn't do anything about that, one way or another. And it's that way on purpose to try to keep those separations. You had another question about why haven't we issued a stop work order. Under the UCC, the stop work order can only be issued for a violation of the UCC or if the building is being built or poses a danger to the surrounding community. That order could be issued by a zoning officer. It isn't up to the solicitor's office or to this council to impose a stop work order. And to sort of tie together what our discussion, I believe we talked about an hour on the phone about these. What I was trying to communicate was that there was an interpretation that was made of the code by Mr. Martin when he received these plans. And that interpretation, what I was concerned about is whether this was an inconsistent interpretation. And that's why I worked with Mr. Metrick in an attempt to see if this was the only property where the garage was built in what I believe your issue was at the time was a side yard and a rear yard setback above 660 feet. I have no recollection of you bringing up any issues about two side yard setbacks. Because to tell you the truth, I don't know. I haven't looked into that issue in order to speak intelligently on it. I believe that we were talking about the issue being raised as whether this is a rear yard and a side yard. So,
Go ahead.
so
Finish your
I
comment.
mean that was my impression. So, and if that's something that I think should be clear to look into, I don't know one way or another whether that's in violation or not. But so that's to answer your question. I mean, this council doesn't have much power. Your proper role is to go to the zoning hearing board. That is the proper path. And I'd have to look at the clock, but if that's something that you need to pursue, would like to pursue, there are time limits on it. So that isn't something that you should, and hopefully the attorney that you had spoke to you about that. So there's nothing that could be done here. You're willing to take that path, and the zoning hearing board's job is to interpret to the judge and put a ruling on the initial interpretation of the zoning officer.
Thank you,
Just
Mr.
one
Walco.
comment, I guess. If I could.
I'm going to move on to the next
Okay.
person because we had
That's
about
fine.
5 minutes. Ms. Bizak.
Can I stay sitting? I can
Sorry?
stay sitting or should I
You
stand?
can stay sitting. We don't
Okay.
have to stand, but please say your name and address for the record.
Yes, thank you. Kimberly Bizak, 237 Dudley Avenue. Thank you for giving me 5 minutes to speak. As many of you know, the whole demolition bit is my soapbox these days. And after last week's meeting, I have to admit I was very discouraged and disappointed to hear that we couldn't do much regarding demolition delays. So at home I talked to my husband about it, and he and I did some more research, and I am even more determined than ever to find a way to defend Narberth. So I just want to take a quick minute to summarize the new research that I found regarding examples of demolition ordinances in Pennsylvania. The two that were the most interesting to me were in the township of Connoy and also in Lancaster. I'll speak to the one in Lancaster because it's very clearly defined, and I actually brought 3 copies for the Building and Zoning Committee, and I can email the rest to everyone else. Thank you. Absolutely. I will email it to everyone. And there's time to take pictures. Okay, so I'll speak to the Lancaster one. It was adopted in 2007, and in Chapter 131 of their zoning code, they refer to it as a demolition review ordinance. So the purpose of their ordinance is, and this really speaks to me as far as Narberth goes, is to discourage demolition and encourage adaptive reuse of buildings to protect the character of established neighborhoods. It establishes a procedure for review of applications so that the structural integrity of a building can be determined, so that opportunities for continued use or adaptive reuse can be explored, so the impact of a proposed demolition can be explored, the impact on the neighborhood streetscape. And that was something we talked a lot about at the town hall the other night. Okay. So, the way they do it, in addition to having a zoning officer and a zoning and hearing board, they've created something they call a historical commission, and it functions in a similar manner to our planning commission. It consists of 7 residents that are appointed to 4-year terms by council, and basically the way it works, the zoning officer receives a completed demolition application, and if the building is greater than 50 years old and it still maintains its integrity, or it contributes to the streetscape, then that application is sent to the Historic Commission for review by the zoning officer. The Historic Commission finishes their review. Usually the developer or the owner of the property will come in and give a presentation. Then they will submit a written recommendation to council regarding whether or not they think the building should be allowed to be demolished. So the demolition review ordinance, it just helps protect the buildings that, this is a quote, contribute to the character and constitute the fabric of the community. It does allow an emergency demolition of condemned buildings to protect health and safety of the community. 1 minute. Okay, no, it's fine. I just have one last thing to say. So that's what's happening in Lancaster since 2008. It's also happening in a town called Connoy in 2007. What's interesting to note that currently Erie, Pennsylvania, as of like a November 2015 article I read, they are also working towards establishing a historical review commission in their town to try to discourage, and when they can't discourage demolitions to better manage the demolitions that are occurring there. So anyway, I feel like maybe there's still hope for us as far as demolitions in Narberth.
I very much appreciate your research.
Thank you.
So thank you for coming to our meeting. I know there are many members of council who are of like mind to your opinion. I have given my copy to our solicitor, and I'm sure that he's going to look at it.
Sure, I mean, I think what council would need to entertain is whether you want to establish a historical architectural review or ARC. My understanding is that was something that was, had some traction or had some interest some years ago, and there wasn't much interest there prior to my time. My opinion right now is that that is the only way that is really available to stop these demolitions.
And that is the mechanism.
That is the mechanism you would need to do it, and that what most people do is to establish that board. But even in that case, you can't just do a blanket to say every building in Narberth adds to the texture of Narberth, and every building is historic. There needs to be some objective criteria for it. It can't be a blanket. Okay.
Well, this went into much more detail than what I gave the summary of, but yeah, it very clearly defined in here what was up for consideration, what it would never even go to the commission, so.
Okay, well, thank you very much. As council will be reorganizing in January, I hesitate to assign this to a committee because we're not sure who will be in charge of that committee. So I'm gonna actually guess if we can leave this with the solicitor's office.
This is an ongoing issue that I'm looking at actively, trying to see if there's anything that can be done, so I'll be sure to be in communication with the next president.